Let's be real for a second. We've all been there. You spend $80, 80, on a game that was promised to be the next revolution. You've watched the trailers, you've read the developer deep dives, and you've cleared your weekend. Then you boot it up, and within 20 minutes, the frame rate is chugging like a slideshow, the AI is walking into walls, and the innovative gameplay loop is actually just a glorified chore list designed to sell you a battle pass. 2025 was supposed to be a golden year, but instead it gave us some of the most spectacular faceplants in the history of the medium. We saw GTA killers that couldn't even manage a functional car physics engine. We saw legendary studios release co-op shooters so bland they felt like they were generated by a boardroom algorithm. We saw the death of ownership and the rise of the always online nightmare. Today, we're looking at the wreckage. This isn't just a list of bad games, it's an autopsy of why the AAA industry is currently eating itself alive. Grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's talk about why these games sucked and what it means for the future of our hobby. If there was one game that defined overpromise and underdeliver in 2025, it was Mind's Eye. This was supposed to be the triumphant return of Leslie Benzies. You know the name. He's the guy who practically architected the modern Grand Theft Auto formula. The hype was astronomical. People were calling it the Rockstar Killer. But when Mind's Eye finally dropped this past summer, the reality hit like a bucket of ice water. It wasn't a Rockstar Killer, it was barely a functional game. The biggest problem? Ambition without a foundation. The world was massive, sure, but it was empty. Not atmospheric. Empty. We forgot to put things to do here. Empty. You drive for 5 minutes through stunningly rendered environments only to find a mission that felt like it was designed in 2008. The AI was the real kicker. In a world that was touted as living and breathing, the NPCs had the situational awareness of a goldfish. Guards would stare at a wall while you shot their friends 3 feet away. It was a technical disaster that proved that a big name and a big budget don't mean anything if you don't have a cohesive vision. Sony ended up issuing mass refunds, and the Steam reviews are still sitting at mostly negative. It's a heartbreaking example of how the gap between marketing and reality has become a canyon. Then we have Remedy Entertainment. Now, look, we love Remedy here at Pixel Pop. Control was a masterpiece. Alan Wake 2 was a work of art. So, when they announced FBC, Firebreak, a co-op shooter set in the Control universe, we were cautiously optimistic. Maybe they could bring that weird, supernatural flair to the multiplayer space? Spoiler alert, they didn't. Firebreak is perhaps the most corporate game Remedy has ever made, and you can feel the lack of soul in every mission. It took everything that made Control special, the mystery, the brutalist architecture, the shifting reality, and stripped it down into a generic, grind-heavy squad shooter. The missions were repetitive to the point of insanity. Go here, defend this point, shoot 3 waves of hiss, repeat. There was no sense of discovery. The live service elements were baked in so deep that the game felt more like a job than a hobby. It missed sales expectations so badly that it actually triggered a profit warning for the studio and led to the CEO resigning. It's a cautionary tale. You can't just slap a popular IP onto a boring gameplay loop and expect players to stick around. Even the Titans aren't safe. Call of Duty. Black Ops 7 might have sold millions because it's Call of Duty, but it represents a dangerous shift in the series. They marketed the campaign as a progression, but what they actually did was turn the single-player experience into an always online, co-op-focused mess. Remember the days of cinematic, tightly paced Black Ops stories? Those are gone. In BO7, the campaign felt like a series of repurposed multiplayer maps. You couldn't even pause the game in single player because it was technically a live session. Think about that. You're playing by yourself, the doorbell rings, and you can't pause because the servers say no. The narrative was hurried, the checkpoints were broken, and the whole thing felt like an afterthought to push people toward the battle pass. While the zombies mode and standard multiplayer were fine, the campaign, the soul of the Black Ops brand, was effectively gutted. It's a clear sign that the yearly release cycle is finally breaking the creative backs of these studios. And we can't talk about sucking without talking about the lazy remasters. 2025 gave us Glover and Captain Blood. Glover was an N64 game that was polarizing back then, and guess what? It's still frustrating today. The remaster did absolutely nothing to fix the clunky physics or the camera issues. It was a 1-1 port of a game that hasn't aged well, sold at a price that felt like a joke. Then there's Captain Blood. This was a lost game from the PS2 era that finally got a release. Everyone loves a good recovered media story, but once people actually played it, they realized why it was shelved in the first place. It was a repetitive, buggy God of War clone that felt 20 years out of date because, well, it was. Sometimes the past should stay in the past. So, why are we seeing so many high-profile failures? It boils down to three things: greed, scope creep, and technical debt. 1. Greed. Publishers are obsessed with recurring revenue. They don't want to sell you a game once. They want to sell you a subscription. This leads to every game being turned into a live service, even when it doesn't fit the genre. It's why Firebreak failed. 2. Scope creep. Studios are trying to make worlds so big that they can't actually fill them. Mind's Eye had a world the size of a small country, but the depth of a puddle. We don't need bigger anymore. We need better. 3. Technical debt. We are still seeing games launch in broken states because the day one patch has become a crutch. Developers are forced to hit arbitrary release dates set by shareholders, knowing the game isn't finished. 2025 was a wake-up call. We're seeing a massive disconnect between what gamers want and what boardrooms think will make money. But there is a silver lining. Every time a giant like Mind's Eye or Firebreak falls, it leaves room for indie developers who actually care about the player experience to step up. But I want to hear from you. What was the game that broke your heart in 2025? Was there a release you actually enjoyed that everyone else hated? Let's get a conversation going in the comments. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this deep dive. It really helps a new channel like Pixel Pop find its footing, and I'll catch you in the next one.